We'll make a little Farbrengen. It should Beis Tammuz. Good Yom Tiv. Today is the day when our Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who we really learn his Maimorim, and I share, by the way, I've been Farbrengen here in various places. Last night we were Farbrengen till 11:30 at night. And in Hollywood, in a Chabad Anash community, it's called Walnut Creek. It's like a little enclave in Hollywood, and there must have been about 30 Anash that came or so. And I mentioned to them that we learned the Frierdiker. What? Yeah.
Does the word Anash just mean like Balabatim? Is that the implication of that term?
Well, Anash is an acronym for Anshe Shlomeinu. Like that? Yeah, but it means like our fraternity. So the Anash of Bells is the Anash of Bells. The Anash of Chabad it's those that are part of this Hasidus or this movement or whatever it could be. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever heard.
Term, I've only seen that.
Go ahead.
That's what's going to be my question. I've only seen that in the Sefer Tanya, that particular phrase. So I just wonder if it's commonly used in other groups.
It's not commonly used in other groups. No. Anyway, so I encourage them to learn the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimorim. That's my last campaign. And Shabbos I was in Boca Raton and Farbrengen over there and encouraged them, The Rebbe's Maimorim, we've discussed this at different times, need to be learned, but they're a different type, and in a way much more difficult, and it's haskola, it's more intellectual. You need a lot of background. These Maimorim lend themselves to definitely a shir barabim, and psychological and emotional and characteristics, and of course we have Chassidus ideas in it. So, just that's something that, like I shared the word that we learned yesterday about Hashem Elokeinu. I said it over last night, and two hardcore Lubavitchers I saw, they wanted to know where the Maimer is, and they want to look it up and they want to learn it. I'm saying, so you should know that our learning in the morning is a springboard to draw many other people in. It's amazing how from our little shir here we could, accomplish so much. Anyway, so today's Yud Beis Tammuz.
And you should also know that I thought of it this morning and sang Kriya Shema. So.
Beautiful. But Hillel, that's only one day. But it's a good beginning. So, today, in 1927, do the math, almost 100 years ago, is the day when the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was liberated from his imprisonment, from his hard labor. On Gimel Tammuz of that year, another week and a half before, they told him that they won't kill him. They'll have mercy on him and they'll let him die in jail by sending him away and starving him and with typhus and everything else. He was sent to a place called Kostrama. And on Yud Beis Tammuz, they told him he's a free man, but like our good, Russian brethren, they don't let you out, even though they told you, why? Because the offices were closed. So why don't they wait to tell him to the next day on Yud Gimel? No, they tell him it's all part of their evil. They tell him on the 12th, but meanwhile he has to sit in jail another day. It's all to try to break the person. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, when he spoke about this several times, he said that's what they had in mind. But what we benefited is that we gained an extra day of Yom Tov, and we don't say Tachnun for 2 days. And it's not just, a funny fact. It's an attitude that the Rebbe shares. It's an approach.
That's a very rare.
What?
It's very rare. Also in Chabad, not to say Tachnun. It's very rare not to say Tachnun by Chabad.
Right.
Not like all the other Hasidim.
Right.
And everything.
We don't say Tachnu Yud Tes Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz. And by the way, we do say Tachnu Yud Shvat and Gimel Tammuz. If it's a Yartzeit Chabad says Tachnu. And by the way, we're not the only Hasidus. The Skvera Hasidim Chernobyl, they also say Tachnun on every Yartzeit of when many other Hasidic groups don't. They do say, except on their own Rebbe's Yartzeit. On Beis, listen, they don't. So, we're not the only ones in this. But anyway, the point is that the message from this fact, the Rebbe said, is that when you have something negative happen, or it seems to be negative, and then later on you see that there was a positive twist to it. So, but what happened? What happened is that in 1920, before the Rebbe Rasha passed away, he called his son on, I think on his birthday, which happens to be Yud Beis Tammuz, is the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday. He was born in 1880. He called him in and he said it should be, he wished him a bracha, and he said it should be b'chesed u'verachamim, with kindness and mercy. Now, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was how old? He was 40 years old. He was a grown man with children, very active and everything else. And his father gives him such a wish, such a bracha. And then after that, the Rebbe Rasha passed away, Cheshvan. So he didn't know what to make of it. So he writes in his memoirs, he writes that it took me 7 years to understand the bracha that my father gave me 7 years ago. Only in 1927, when I was taken away on the 15th of Sivan until Gimel Tammuz and then Beis Tammuz, I understood my father's bracha of 7 years ago, that what will happen to me in my life should be b'chesed u'verachamim. In those years, from 1922, when Stalin Yamach Shimon came out with his edict of being anti-religion and all that, anti-Torah, those were very, very hard years for all of Russian Jewry. And many of them left, if they were able to escape to Eretz Yisrael or to America. Most Rabbonim, Litvische, Hasidische, others, they tried to get out. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was a Rav in a city called Luban, which is in Russia, he tried in the early 30s, late 20s and 30s to get out. I printed it in documents. I got hold of the tik, the file of Rav Moshe's trying to make Aliyah. He wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael. And the documents show clearly he tried once and he tried, and they gave him permission and they gave him a visa, but for some reason he didn't apply on time, so he missed one deadline, and by the time he came, it was too late. He had to reapply. The bottom line is, he didn't come to Eretz Yisrael, he came to America. But for years, I think like 4 or 5 years, he was actively involved in getting himself and his family out. And so other Rabbonim, Rabbi Zevin, who came to Eretz Yisrael, who lived in the Shchunas HaRabbonim in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Shlomo Yosef Zevin, and many other Rabbonim. The Frierdiker Rebbe, he said to his people, to his Hasidim, we need to stay here to save Jewry. We, as a general rule, should not leave. There were individuals that he sent to America, but you can count them on your hands. He had the policy to continue Yiddishkeit, teaching Talmud Torahs and mikvahs and everything else in the underground. And what he created was a network called the Underground Network, the clandestine operation of Yiddishkeit in the heart of the lion. And it's known, and sadly, in a way, that many of those people never they were killed, they were murdered or starved. But the Rebbe demanded Mesilas Nefesh, self-sacrifice. I just came from shul, and there's a chassid. His name is Rabbi Ichidrism. He was the first shliach to Berkeley, California. He came to Berkeley in 1972, and he opened the Chabad house there. I mean, Rabbi Kunin bought the Chabad house, but he was the first rabbi to get, and then he hired Rabbi Chaim Citron, who was in Los Angeles. So this Rabbi Ichidrism, his father was one of my mashpiyim, was elder chassid, Rabbi Avraham Avraham / Mayor. He came from a little city, a village, whatever, called Mayorer. So they called him Rabbi Avraham Mayor. And he was really, really a lively chassid, a smart chassid. He had 9 children, and the KGB was after him. 8 out of the 9 were born in different cities because he was on the run. No one had more than 2, 3, 4 children in those days. You couldn't. And Avraham Mayor somehow did. I remember in 1983 when I came back from Los Angeles as a yeshiva bacher, and so I asked him to teach us and Tanya. So he said, sure. So we met in the shul. I remember the winter was cold, and we met in the shul. There was a light on, and from the Tanya, he told us warrior stories. He told us stories of how he survived and beat the KGB. Fascinating. I wish we didn't tape it. I wish I would have taped it. Because it was like stories out of, you couldn't believe it. I'll give you an example. He said he put on a long, what do they call it, trench coat, right? And so he had deep pockets, very deep pockets. So he was able to, I think, maybe hold his tefillin all the way down in his deep pocket, and the agents didn't pick it up. I mean, he came up with all kinds of clever ways how to beat them. So this Avraham Mayor, Rabbi Avraham Mayor, he would say the following. He would say like this: anyone that's not ready to give themselves, to allow themselves to be slaughtered, is nothing. With all your Torah and all your mitzvahs, if you're not ready to go to the shechita, forget it. Now you imagine, and he, the Frierdiker Rebbe, made a pact, a krisut brit, with 10 Hasidim, that they will do or die for Yiddishkeit, anything. They will continue in the underground with the mikvahs and Talmud Torahs, and if they kill you, they kill you. And they say that he was one of the 10. That I'm ready. So he would talk, in other words, this Rav and this Chassid and all this. 1 second. He says, are you ready to let yourself be slaughtered? You're not ready? Okay, you're a good guy, but you're not in yet. Yes, Moshe.
Hey, Rabbi Delvin, do we know who those 10 individuals were?
I do not know. I cannot tell you exactly who the 10 are. There was someone named Rabbi Yoina Paltov or Yoina Khan. They say Ben Zeshemtev. So, you hear names, but I don't believe that there's any document showing who the 10 are. But, it's something maybe I could ask. I doubt it. Anyway.
Okay. Just curious.
Yes. No, I'm curious too. I've thought about your question for years, but the point being that this dedication to Yiddishkeit.
You can search the archives of the KGB today. Maybe you can find them online.
Yeah, maybe.
That's a joke.
Yeah, right. I got it. Anyway, the point is that the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was Mr. Mesiras Nefesh. And because of this, when he came to America in 1930 to visit and later in 40 to settle, he was given the red carpet by everyone. Chassid, not Chassid, Jew, Lahavdil Goy. Because when they heard that this person gave his life and was ready to die for God, so I'll give you an example. Rabbi Eliezer Silver, you've heard that name? Rabbi Eliezer Silver was the head of the Orthodox Union of Rabbanim in the 30s, 40s, and 50s until his passing the late 60s. He was a Litvak, a great Talmud Chacham, a Rav and an activist, and he loved every Yid.
Was he the Aguda?
Well,
was he the same Rabbi Silver of the Aguda?
Yeah. But he before it was called Agudas Rabbanim, whatever. Yeah, and when the Frierdiker Rebbe needed visas to save his students who were in Poland when the Nazis in Machshabam bombarded and started their campaign and all that, Rabbi Silver single-handedly got for the Frierdiker Rebbe and Rabbi Gerari, his son-in-law, the visas. And there was no I'm a Litvisher, I should give it first to the Litvish yeshivas. It didn't. The Frierdiker Rebbe had an open door by everyone because they all knew, let's call a spade. They ran away from Russia. They saved their hide. Okay? That's a fact. And this man stays. And not only does he stay, he tells his Hasidim to stay. So, with that, you can't say anything. And by the way, this attitude spilled over in a positive way in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when Chabad had an active organization called Ezras Achim, helping the brothers, where there were Russian Hasidim who made it to America. They had an organization to help Russian Jews when they started to come over in the late 60s and 70s. And they would send packages of food, and in many ways they helped the Russian Jews in America, and they helped also those who still were in Russia. And there too, it's amazing. Let's say a shul like in Long Island knew a big young Israel, very prominent young Israel. I forget now the Rav's name, and he would what? Rabbi Billet, yes, Hershey.
Rabbi Billet?
Yes, Hershey Billet shul. It's a very prominent young Israel, very wealthy people, and it's a city for itself. And when these people from Ezras Achim asked him to solicit people, to raise money, he did it. He did it without a question. And he's a student. He was a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik of YU. Russian Yidden, they're the top. All this came from Yud Beis Tammuz. So today, when you ask yourself, Moshe, a question, I said this to the people last night. Millions of people were killed. Stalin Yamach Shimon killed them. So many Jews were killed or lost their faith and all that. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe makes a big deal about this Yud Beis Tammuz for a handful full of Yidden. How do you understand that? And the answer is, because of these things that I just told you as examples, it shows that the vision of what the Rebbe had, the previous Rebbe had, continues today. It still continues. The Rebbe, and another example, in the 1960s or 70s, a young Israel leader came to the Rebbe and he says, we want to start sending people to Russia. And we need addresses. We need people's name. And we know that you, Lubavitcher Rebbe, come from Russia and you have contacts there. And the Rebbe told him, this is on Gem. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. The Rebbe told him, I forget his name, who this is. The Rebbe told him, I'm willing to share with you, but you have to follow our conditions and rules because this is clandestine information. It still wasn't, glasnost and perestroika, and everyone is in jeopardy. If you will agree to the way we do things quietly, I'll be willing to work with you. And that, by the way, is why the Rebbe disagreed with Meir Kahana's approach of the public demonstrations in the 70s for Russian Jewry. The Rebbe felt, and the Rebbe as a Russian Jew, felt that quiet diplomacy will get much further. And Reb Meir, Hashem Yinkum David, who had Mesiras Nefesh, he was taken from us because he stood up for Yiddishkeit. Reb Meir had a hard time with that. Public demonstrations. public demonstrations. The Rebbe said, no. With Russian Jewry, High Velvel, we're talking all about your culture, the Russian Yidden, your Beis Tammuz Day. It's a Yom Tov. So it's a nice day for you to wear that white and green in the in the hospital or the doctor's office. I'm telling the Chevra that today's day, Yud Beis Tammuz, was planted almost 100 years ago, and on one hand you say, why make such a big deal if only a few people were saved and the Rebbe was saved? Okay, so it's a personal holiday for the Lubavitchers. Okay, I understand. But our Rebbe says no, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says no. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the letter that he wrote a year later, the first celebration of Yud Beis Tammuz as what we call Yom HaGiula, Day of Redemption. He says, Lo yoisi bilvad, Avi, not only I was redeemed today, but Kol Yisrael, Nikre B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna, whoever is only nicknamed, even if he's only nicknamed a Jew, was redeemed on this day. Really? Every Jew, the one walking chves on the beach, the Venice beach now, who's Jewish and enjoying the sun and the sunbathing, he's released on Yud Beis Tammuz? Really? The answer is yes. Why? Because the Nekuda, the idea that you don't allow Teva, like we're learning in the Maimer, you don't allow nature to dominate you because we as Jews are inherently supernatural, that's Yud Beis Tammuz. And only that was the only way that the Frierdiker Rebbe and his Hasidim survived Stalin and company. Otherwise, they would have given up a long time ago. So today is a day, a festive day, not only for Lubavitchers, Chabadniks, Anash, it's for every single Yid. The celebration of Kedusha over Klippa. That's today's day. Holiness won over negativity. Just like Hanukkah, right? What we say in the Ala Nisim. Today is the same day, the same idea, Kedusha over Klippa. And when a person, and when we experience such a day, it's a day of opportunity. You know, we say, and I've said this and it's worth repeating, we just learned the Maimer. And he said, Eis Rotzen. In the same Mateva it says it's an auspicious time, it's an auspicious day. Today is one of those days that there's an Eis Rotzen. So today, the bracha, an opportunity for your father, for example, Yoinit Avarafu Shalema, is greater today than another day. If you identify with this energy and you make it part of your entire family, it's an Eis Rotzen. I'm just saying, whether it be in health, parnosa, hatzlacha with children, grandchildren, and anything else, today is a day. So this happened on Yud Beis Tammuz, 1927, and it's repeated every single year on the same day. Now another nekuda, another point that we find is that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the letter that I mentioned earlier, in the year, the first celebration of Yud Beis Tammuz, that the way to celebrate the Yom HaGiula is to learn Shiurim Barabim. And the Rebbe said a Maimer, the previous Rebbe, and then our Rebbe repeated it many times. Asara sheyoshvim ba'oiskim b'Torah, 10 people that sit and learn together Torah, Shechina shruya b'neihem. Pirkei Avos. So it's in Chabad, it's known as the Maimer Asara sheyoshvim. So we still have our work cut out for us. We need to get 10 people to learn every day together. We're close, 8, 7, 8, 9, but we need 10, we need 1 million. So that's something that we should work towards. Yes, Hillel.
I just want to clarify, is that was a mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Asar Shioshim?
Yes.
And is it in the Mamar Milukatim? Have we learned it?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. The truth is, maybe it's in volume 2 or 3. I don't think. Check. Maybe I'm wrong. But the Nakuda is, 1 year, Hillel, I think the Rebbe said, and I think in 1975, he said 3 Maimorim with the same beginning, I think. Anyway.
What year?
I think 1975, I think.
The Rebbe said.
The Rebbe would on Yud Beis Tammuz always say a Maimer Chasidus, right? And certain years the opening was Asar Yoshvim, and it was based on his father-in-law's Maimer. The point being that the Yud Beis Tammuz. So in other words, like this. What's the connection between 10 Yidden learning together and what's it called? And his Geula? Torah has the redeeming factor. Because when you immerse yourself in Torah learning, and not as an individual, but as a group, what's created is something greater than the individual. And I can tell you that, and I believe you'll agree that us learning, we learn together every morning. We've created something greater than just learning. You see, that happens. That happens when you learn together in a group. The give and take, and the dialogue, and the smile, and the feeling. All of that comes when you sit and learn together. And the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, pushed that point. Now understand, please. People were scared to go out and learn in public. My father-in-law told me, he remembers, I heard this from Rabbi Mendel Futterfass and my father-in-law, a person named Rabbi Avraham of Gomel, or Hummel. Some of the Russians don't say the hey, they say the Gimel, Gomel, Hummel. And this Avraham found himself sleeping one night together with Rabbi Mendel Futterfass in the same room. And Rabbi Mendel told me this when he visited my home in 1988 or 89 in California, Marin County, because he's our great uncle. So here Rabbi Reichik stayed with us for one night. Rabbi Mendel was a Jew who didn't mince any words, and he would tell you what you need to know. He was an older Chassid, they're older Hasidim Yonasim, who they're to themselves. Rabbi Mendel wasn't. Rabbi Mendel came somewhere and he met another Jew, he would talk to him and demand of him. He was a mashpia, a real mashpia. So here he has this American young man who came out to California in 1984 to do the shlichus of the Rebbe, and now it's 4 or 5 years later, and he happens to be a relative, but he's going to take the opportunity to level me. And he spent hours talking to me. He asked, what are you doing? So I told him what I'm doing, this program, that program, this. And then he started to analyze it. He started to give his ideas. And then he started to give me musar. And I just ate it all up. I have here such a Jew who sat 8-9 years in jail and hard labor and everything. And he's taking the time to be madrich, to educate me. I should live like a real Yid and a real Chassid. It was wonderful. Anyway, so one of the things he told me, and he would say, Dalfin the Hest? Dalfin, you here? He says, you got to lose ego. So I say, absolutely. So he says, but let me tell you a story. Everything, he had a story. He says, this is the story. There was a Yid, Rabbi Avraham of Gomel, he says, and one day I ended up sleeping with him in the same room. And I'm laying in my bed, and he's saying Kriya Shema Shel Amita, and I hear him going, pum, pum, pum. And the noises are coming from under his nose, and it sounds pretty weird. and I can't fall asleep. I get out of my bed and I say, Rabbi Avraham, what are you making these funny, strange noises? He says, let me tell you. The Frierdiker Rebbe in the 1920s said that we have to continue the Chadar and the Cheders and the Mikvahs and the Talmud Torahs, and the main thing is the children, right? Because, Stalin and company weren't against older folk learning and davening. In fact, it's so funny, I told you this, in Moscow, which I visited 2 years ago, a few blocks from one of the KGB offices, there's a shul over there, and they kept it open in 1927 when they imprisoned the Rebbe and others. Why? Because old geezers, we have no problem, because they want to show face. Well, we are against religion? No, we're not against religion. Go, old men, daven. But not children. Educating children, the next generation? No, that we're not going to let you. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's message was to Hasidim, we have to share and encourage people to send their children to yeshiva, cheder, and Talmud Torah. This Avraham was one of the Hasidim, and he went up to the bima in a shul between Mincha and Ma'ariv, and he gave a patch on the bima, and he spoke about this, what the Rebbe wants of him to share with others. Now, you can't imagine how dangerous it was for him to do that, because there were, the KGB agents, the Yevsektia, Jews that were caught in their web. They were called Shmeckers. You heard of the word Shmecker? The word Shmeck is Yiddish.
I heard it.
Yeah. But wait. Shmeck means to smell. In the shuls, they would have those Yevsektia would go into shul, daven. They knew how to daven. Or they pretended to daven. And they would smell who is teaching Jewish children, i.e. they were called Shmeckers. And then they would go to the office, and the next thing they took away the chassid, and you never saw him again. So, for Avraham of Gomel, to get up on the bima and make that announcement was walking into the lion's den, because there were Shmeckers all around. And he did it. And then he continues telling the Reb Mendel Futterfass, he tells him, but the gaiva that I had from standing on the bima and lecturing to the people and talking to the people, I have to get rid of it. So I'm doing tshuva for it. And I'm like talking to myself and humming and brimmen. The word in Yiddish is brimmen, making those like he's crying to himself for the gaiva that he had standing on the bima relaying a message of the Rebbe. Do you understand what a Jew is? Do you understand how what we do is nothing compared to a Jew like that? This is a man who risked his life. And what bothers him years later, that he took a public stance. And that's ego. So Reb Mendel Futterfass turned to me. Dolphin, he says, Dolphin, now you understand what it means to get rid of ego? This is, when we share these stories, and I grew up with these things, at least you hear it and you can think about it and you can work about it. So, when the Frierdiker Rebbe says, as people should learn together, as a result of Beis Tammuz, a year later, what's his message for Klal Yisrael and Hasidim, and his own Hasidim, to make public shiurim and to get up and do this? This was the call of the hour. And the Rebbe, knowing how scared people were, including his Hasidim, he had to give them that courage. And he had to teach them and instruct them and encourage them that learning yourself in your corner is not comparable to learning with other Jews in 1928, in 1929. Now, Baruch Hashem, we don't have those nisyonos, okay? We don't have those tests. We don't have those, trials. But we do have a simple test. Friedrich Rebbe, when he came to America, he said, in Europe, the test was poverty. No one had what to eat and where to sleep, and they were running after you with Yiddishkeit. In America, or in Israel, the free world. After, what's our test? Wealth. Wealth. People have what to eat. They have, even if they're not wealthy. They have their basic needs. No, give up some of your basic needs for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this the Rebbe said, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Baal HaGiula of Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz says, this is our avodah. Our avodah no longer is Mesiras Nefesh on this level, but rather, Hasidus says, Hillel, that the word Nefesh comes from the word, is associated with the word Ratzon, will. Ein nafshi, there's a pasuk. Ein nafshi la'om hazeh. I don't have a will for this nation. It's from Tanakh. So nefesh also means, velvul, it means ratzon. Ein nafshi la'om hazeh. Mesiras nefesh. Give away your soul, meaning not to allow yourself to be shot. We finished that. Give away your will. Like it says in Pirkei Avos, and this is very, very relevant, especially Beruchnius. Begashmius, it's one thing to do a favor, to help a person with a loan, to help a person with food and clothing, and then there's also Beruchnius, someone who appreciates learning and davening, to take away time from their own learning and davening and give it to someone else. That's a great Mesiras Nefesh. I remember when I was in yeshiva in Beis Medrash, about 17 years old, and I would always, my previous years, I would learn with weaker students in yeshiva. And I said, I'm going into Beis Medrash. I want to really learn with a top chavrusa. So he and I are on the same level, and we can really coast into the depths of Torah, of Gemara. My principal comes over to me, a survivor, a special Jew, Rabbi Tenenbaum, a Chassid, and he says, Chaim, he says, there's a boy who came from Italy, and he needs some help. Can you be his chavrusa? I say, Rabbi Tenenbaum, I've been doing this all my life. I finally got to Beis Medrash. I want to really excel in learning. He says, Chaim, you'll gain more from learning with him than with someone else on your level. And he was right, because I had to prepare the Gemara better and the Mefarshim. And Baruch Hashem, he was right. So when a person gives of themselves to teach others, that's the highest type of Mesiras Nefesh today, and it brings only bracha v'hatzlacha, goodness. So Chaim to everyone, that we should have a good Yom Tiv. Everyone should have Parnasa Barchova, Shidduchim Tovim, good health, happiness, and we should be Zeicha to the Gula Shleim already. Mechshiach should come. Any comments or questions before we close?
Yeah, I just want to make a personal comment that these stories, particularly the post-Holocaust and from coming out of communist Russia, these stories of courage were very instrumental in inspiring me on the path of Torah, because I came out of having been kind of in a Hindu-esque group and very
absorb, yeah.
And I had to ask myself the question, like, what made it worth it for people to undergo such extraordinary suffering and Mesiras Nefesh? And that kind of question brought me to Torah and brought me to really struggle to learn, to teach myself and to become a part of Frub life. It really kept me going. So, and especially the heroism of the Friedricher Rebbe is one of the great stories, I think, of that century.
Shkoyach, thank you. It's a gewaltige Sache that you said. Very, very important, very meaningful for eternity. For eternity, Bemis. I'm not saying to flatter you because, it's very telling, and that shows that Yud Beis Tammuz is relevant 100 years later. For what Hillel just said,
right. Yeah.
What he just said is proof to what I said earlier about Yud Beis Tammuz. Chevra, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. We'll continue the mimer. Take care. Hatzlacha. Bye-bye.
Yom Tov. Good Yom Tov. Good Yom Tov to everybody.
Yom Tov.